Hello and welcome to The Close Read, a production of the Claremont Institute. I'm your host, Assistant Editor Spencer Clavin, and I will be diving every episode into an essay or review from the latest issue of the Claremont Review of Books, the gold standard in conservative thought and political philosophy. Each time we publish an issue, I will sit down with a few authors and dig deeper into the themes and ideas that motivated their writing. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started. My guest today is Michael Anton. He's a former senior national security official in the Trump administration, but he's also a well-celebrated political philosopher. He writes especially cogently on Machiavelli, but people may know him best, especially in Claremont circles, for his pseudonymous writing during the 2016 election, the Flight 93 election, which actually broke our website. It was that popular. And he's returning now after 4 years of a Trump presidency to evaluate, take stock, and make some recommendations. He's got a book coming out soon called The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. And the essay that we're here to discuss is adapted from that book. It's called The Case for Trump. It can be found in the latest issue of the Claremont Review of Books. Mike, it's such a pleasure to have you. I'm a big fan, and I'm glad to get to talk to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You begin this essay here, you concede a fair number of gripes that conservatives are having or might be having with Trump. Where's the wall, right? Why wasn't he stronger on the riots, that kind of thing. Time is rocketing on apace. We're now, as of this recording, we're 13 weeks out from the election. How's he doing? How would you evaluate him on some of these gripes? Do you think he's in line to do well?
I mean, I state the gripes for two reasons. One is because they're out there, and if I didn't address them, people would, well, you didn't even acknowledge that. And two, to a certain extent, I shared them. I mean, I'd like to have a completely completed wall. I'd like to have seen, although I've been more ambivalent about this now. At the beginning, I would have liked to have seen a more robust response to what I call the woke riots. I'm not so sure anymore because I've had a lot of conversations with friends that people who say, no, look, this is a tactic. The left is trying to bait Trump into doing something that they can then argue is an over-the-top and unjustified response and make everybody martyrs. And he's kind of in an impossible position. And I'm not sure, in reflecting on it, that, I mean, look, if Blue America wants to just eat itself and destroy itself, I don't know that it's necessarily incumbent on Trump or anyone outside of these places to try to get them to stop. I mean, I think they should stop, of course, as a moral matter. Then you have to admit, too, that there's certainly a lot of people in Blue America who don't want this to be happening. But on the other hand, it's kind of like when you get to deal with a family member who's a junkie or whatever. If they don't want to help themselves, there's not a whole lot you can do from the outside until the will to change and get better comes from within. And right now, in terms of the elites and the leadership, and obviously all the people on the streets, I don't see any will in Blue America to get itself under control. So,
well, I'm glad to hear you say that because I've been having somewhat similar thoughts about just, this can't possibly be a good PR look, can it? But then I wonder, the more I talk to people, the less I feel like anybody experiences cognitive dissonance anymore. Like I just think that the internal contradictions which conservatives are so fond of pointing out in the radical woke riots are just not registering. And I wonder, do you think that this is going to be bad?
Well, I guess the question is, it's not a good PR look for whom? I mean, to me, that the PR for Blue America looks terrible.
Right.
And people are staying away in droves. I mean, I try to keep up with some of this. I saw a guy walk out into Manhattan with his phone and just sort of held it up in the, incredibly busy Midtown streets and stood in the middle of the street and of a busy intersection right near one of my former offices for 5 minutes and not a single car came. So, so to a certain extent, other people are thinking this is bad PR for Blue America, and therefore I'm going to leave, whether that's temporarily or forever.
Yeah.
Is it bad PR for Trump? I think you could argue this both ways, and both things may be true at the same time, which is on the one level, yes, you're the president, whatever political party or political philosophy you have, you're the leader of a country, the country's coming apart like this, and you either can't or won't control it, that's bad PR. On the other hand, these aren't his supporters doing this. They're not zones, cities, towns, states governed by his party. They're not his, they're not people who share his philosophy doing it. And once again, if he if he were to try and go in and do something, very major about it, that could backfire on him from a PR perspective and from another perspective. I mean, look, if it's one thing to send in the National Guard, say, to a city or a town where the mayor and the majority of the citizens are saying this chaos is terrible and has to stop. Please help us. It's another thing when the mayor, the governor, and all the citizens who own the streets, so to speak, are saying, stay out, stormtrooper. You're just asking for a fight in that case. And then who are you really saving, and what are you saving them from? That's not an easy question to answer. So, as I said, I'm more willing to give Trump a pass on that. Look, broadly speaking, all of the things that we may be upset, dissatisfied with Trump over, we didn't get this, we haven't fully gotten that, and so on, have not one cause, it's too much to say one cause, but the overwhelmingly, if we were to isolate one cause as being the most important cause, why we didn't get everything we wanted out of the Trump administration yet, it's because of the incredible opposition that he's facing from his own party, from the opposition party, from all elites. So to do anything has taken almost every ounce of energy, strategy, patience, and so on that he has. And if you have to judge it on that basis, in which case I say, yeah, we were definitely better off for having had him than had we lost in 2016. And even if he can't get us everything, I don't think he can get us everything we want or need in the next 4 years. The hope is that, as I say in the chapter from which that essay is derived, the hope is that this is the beginning of a new party, whether that's a new Republican Party, or if the Republican Party just finally says we're going to be the Chamber of Commerce Party forever, and we just let it die and create a new Trumpist directed party. The hope is that this is the beginning of a real realignment. In a way, the first realignment since the New Deal, since I think, political science, this concept that the electorate goes through a periodic convulsion. And the last time that really happened clearly, where one party, a stable party system was thrown out, a new one introduced, was the New Deal elections of 1930. First, the overwhelming response after the Hoover won the 28 election in Congress, and then FDR's election in 32. So there have been these other earthquakes that happened in 68, in 80, and in 94, and arguably 2008, all of which, political science is sort of, because maybe this is finally the new realignment, and then have concluded, doesn't fit. And maybe it's my hope that someday we'll look backward and 2016 will have finally been.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, this is framing that I really appreciate, because basically in the essay you outline two options: either the Republican Party adapts, or we just sort of scrap it and leave them to.
Yeah. I mean, we can. I think it'll. We won't maybe even need to scrap it. It's just become so irrelevant.
Yeah. Sort of dither into obscurity.
It's parties that come together over issues, when those issues no longer remain salient, they die, and/or parties that reconstitute themselves on a coalition basis, when the coalition becomes untenable, they die. The original issue for the Republican Party was, of course, the expansion of slavery. So it won on that. It had to fight the Civil War, but it won on that question.
Yeah.
And then adopted new issues. Right now, what's happening? It's not an issue question as much as I think it is a coalition question. So if the current Republican Party is still going to be kind of, foreign overseas adventurism in the name of peace through strength, but it's really war through strength. They just want to fight everywhere. Plus Chamber of Commerce, tax and regulation agenda, plus the libertarians, plus social conservatives. It's an uneasy coalition that doesn't really work anymore, and that doesn't serve the interests of the people who voted for Trump, who want immigration controls. They want tariffs. They want industrial policy. They want insourcing. They want policy that encourages the insourcing or resourcing of manufacturing, and so on and so forth, all of which the current Republican orthodoxy rejects.
Yeah.
We won't even, if the Republican Party can't change, the good news in a sense is I don't even know that we need to kill it. It'll just die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that the Reaganite three-legged stool has been kind of rotting for a long time. One of the things you say in the essay is that a point of continuity, a rare point of continuity between the old right and the new right, are these social issues. That there will at least be a kind of recognizable focus on preserving the family in some recognizable way, on any number of kind of keeping 50-year-old men out of girls' locker rooms.
Yeah.
One question that I have, so you say in this that the low-hanging fruit for the left here has already been picked.
Yeah,
and that
I believe that. I mean, when you're equating, you know, crazy things like men claiming that they're women so that they can go into MMA and beat up biological women and win trophies,
Right.
or boys competing in girls' track meets and, you know, winning by multiple, you know, huge margins because they're biological boys, right? And then you compare that to something like segregation and, you know, legal, you know, some of the gross legal injustices of the past regime, and you say this is the defining struggle exactly as a moral equivalent to this, it's clear to me that you've gone crazy, and that you know, every real serious injustice, if these are the ones that are left, every real serious has been addressed.
Yeah,
right?
well, it's gotten Baroque as hell, that's for sure. The kind of just ever more elaborate.
This is enough to get me canceled, by the way. Like, you're supposed to genuflect to this. It's just like, I'm sorry. I'm lucky to work for an employer. Like, Hillsdale College is not going to fire me because I said a person with an X and a Y chromosome and certain biological organs is male.
Right.
Period. I don't care what he can self-identify however he want. I won't punish him in the law for self-identification, whatever, but you're not going to force me to say something that I know is false.
No, this is
so that's what they want. I mean, they want to say, you have to say this.
Yeah.
And if you don't say it, we'll make sure that you're canceled and fired and so on and so forth. Like, I just, you know, boy, am I glad not to be in a position where I have to do that.
Well, right. I mean, this is the funny thing. You know, I always joke that similarly that I'm like my employers, if anything, they're going to get on my case for not saying enough, for not kind of speaking out enough on this stuff. But right, so many people out there genuinely feel like their livelihood is at stake. And one concern that I have when we start talking about kind of the courage deficiency on the right is that this has proven to be a very effective tactic, right? I mean, so are these folks just going to all come out in droves in November and reveal that they've been kind of thinking?
They could. I don't know. Look, I didn't expect Trump to win the last time. So that was a surprise. And when one of the reasons it's surprising is Caldwell, who's, you know, one of our colleagues who published a book earlier this year, says in the last chapter of his book that the divide on opinions, especially on these cultural questions, between the two Americas became so great, but then it was coupled with a kind of suppression mechanism that what happens is blue America doesn't know what red America or how it thinks anymore. It's lost complete touch with it, and it doesn't know how to poll them anymore. So I did say this somewhere in the book. I forgot exactly what chapter, but one advantage in the sense that our side has over the other side, and I live in blue America, and, you know, I worked at the White House and I dealt with the press a lot, so I know these people, and much better than they know me, right? Or us, or how we think.
100%.
And now I'm not saying that I'm like the perfect representative of somebody from the heartland. I'm from the coasts, you know, I've only lived on the coasts. I've only lived in liberal places. I'm educated in liberal places, and so on and so on and so forth. But just by being conservative, I have a sense of what conservatives think. But by being alive, you can't help but be bombarded with 24/7 propaganda. So there's not a sentient red person alive who doesn't know exactly what blue America thinks of them or what its opinion set is. Blue America is totally mystified about red America. Yeah. It doesn't know, and it doesn't know how to poll them. So we could be quite shocked in November. I'm hoping. I mean, I never predict elections because I never am right. But, you know, the analogy would be in France in '68, a similar kind of incoherent leftist mob took to the streets in May of '68. It wasn't, you know, they were protesting. They just were protesting. Like it was even more incoherent than what we've got going on now. And everybody, you know, de Gaulle was so terrified, he actually left the country for a brief period, thinking like they were going to storm the Elysee Palace and oust him. And he was able to return, and they held the election on schedule that later. And surprisingly, the Gaullists won an overwhelming. Now, de Gaulle at that point had resigned. It was the Gaullists without de Gaulle, but they won this overwhelming victory that shocked everybody because what had happened in May so alienated basically everybody in France who wasn't part of this elite information age rentier class. Was sick of them. That could happen in the fall. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this complete inability, it is always remarkable to me. I was in a green room with one of the Weinstein brothers, and they're, you know, the Brett and Eric Weinstein, Barry Weiss, some of these folks that have kind of defected from the left because of a lack of liberalism, still haven't quite grokked what you're describing. Like, they still don't quite know what conservatives believe. Like, think that we won't talk to them, think that we want to cancel them, and so forth. I
cop to half of that. I don't really want to talk to them. I don't want to cancel them though.
Okay.
I'd like them to just go their own. I'd like to perfectly leave them alone, but I also want to be left alone.
Why don't you want to talk
the
to them?
institutions that I care about, but they're just on this sort of relentless attack mode against everything that matters to any of us.
Right.
And forgive me, I don't see us doing that to them. I'm sure they could come up with some example, but what would it be?
Yeah.
Like, what was the last time the conservatives? They'll say something like prayer in schools. Well, didn't we lose that fight in the 60s?
Right.
Evolution. Is there a place in America that forces? Maybe I am out of touch. There are places where you're forced to pay fealty to some conservative opinion and you lose your job. And okay, where are those places? I actually might want to move there. So let me know.
I know. Well, it's always like you guys won't listen to the Dixie Chicks because they said something political, and therefore you participate in cancel culture.
Okay. So, or I guess now, I've seen that all the pro sports leagues except hockey went extremely woke, and their ratings went through the floor.
Right. Exactly.
People don't want their sports politicized.
Right.
But see, that's obviously a completely different thing than what they are trying to do to us.
Yeah.
What they've done is they just alienated people who are just like, I don't care about this anymore. Right. Well, okay, it's a product, it's a business, you're selling it. People aren't, if you gum it up and make it worse, people aren't going to buy it. It's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Are you going to force us to watch ball games now? How's that going to work?
I mean, probably. I imagine they would like that very much. This is the Trader Joe's statement. Was just recently they just sort of made this statement. Well, we name our. People got mad at them.
Yeah, I saw this, but they stood up to it, right? Or did they eventually back down?
No, they stood up. They said, look, we name our products on the basis of what people find amusing and purchase, and This is 100,000.
And Trader Joe's is one of the bluest, kind of hipsterish places imaginable, right? It only exists in, these very kind of, I was going to say high income, but that's not quite right? Because Trader Joe's it's sort of like Whole Foods for people who make a little bit less money.
That's right. No, it's
and then they make up for they make up for it with all that kitsch and all the comedy and the $2 Chuck and the names and stuff like that. But that's been their shtick for a while. Yeah. It's not Kroger's or Cracker Barrel, right? It's not something that you're going to see from a highway tooling through the middle of the Ohio Valley. That's not the customer base that they serve. But it's interesting that, of course, they're eating their own at the moment. I think it is a bit like 68 in that the left right now is not paying much attention. They're not paying that much attention to conservatives, with the exception of Trump, who they have to defeat in 2020 in their own mind. But for the most part, they're finding somebody who deviates a millimeter off of their particular line and shooting them. And the whole right, they're just like, you guys still here? They'll come after us eventually. Once they've killed everyone on their own side that they think is a heretic, they'll start coming after us next.
Well, right. So this is an interesting question. Do you think that they will domesticate us as a kind of, in their ideal world, would they domesticate us as a kind of loserdom, as an opposition that they can mock, or do they actually want us dead, gone, out of our jobs and so forth?
I debate that in my head often, and I debate it in the book. And in the end, I will say, A, I don't know. B, if I were to guess, I would say there are factions of them. There are some of them that are so radical they really want us dead and gone.
Yeah.
And then there are some who are slightly less radical, whose view is, no, we don't want you dead. We need you to keep you around so that we can administer the punishment that you've had coming for centuries, right? You have to stay alive so that you can get what's coming to you. And then there are some of them whom I think are like, some of these people actually pay taxes and keep the communities supported. And maybe we don't want to kill them or crush them underfoot, but just find the sweet spot where we slap them around just enough that they keep going to work and their tax checks keep clearing. What I am more or less convinced of is that there's no master plan here. There's a hive mind, but it's an imperfect hive mind because it's got branches, or it's compartmentalized, and parts of it think one thing and parts of it think another thing. This is what chapter 4 of the book is all about. And to a very large extent, the reason why they are a coalition is because on the largest questions, they either agree or overlap. But there's a lot of internal disagreements in that coalition. It's fractious.
Yeah.
And I do think, though, that the problem that you're going to have is, if and to the extent that there is that third category of let's not take this too far because it would be bad for business, right? Yeah. How much control do they have over the first category, which is we want them all dead? Yeah. And that's the big unanswered question. Right now, it looks like they don't have that much, because if I were a Democrat or a ruling class poobah or a hedge fund maven living in Manhattan, I would have shut this down a month ago or 2 months ago.
Right.
I would have let a little spasm, to give America a taste and scare them a little bit. But like, I wouldn't have let Manhattan be sacked by Visigoths the way it was after 30 years of gradual and successive improvement back to a world-class city with sky-high property values and safe streets where global capital wants to come. Yeah. They gave all that away. They gave 30 or plus years of progress away basically in a day or in a week. And now Manhattan is if you watch something like one of my favorite movies, Taxi Driver, all shot on the streets with a steady cam, no extras. This is really the way Midtown and the Alphabet City looked in the summer of 1976 when they shot it, I believe. It looked, from what I have seen, I haven't been there, but I have seen the pictures and the videos, and I've talked to several people I know who live there. It's worse than that. It looks worse than that. It feels worse than that, and it's semi-deserted. Like, if they really had control over the situation, my intuition is they wouldn't have let it get this far. So it leaves me to doubt that, like, right. I wonder or they're afraid. Maybe they may be so afraid of the mob. In my classes I teach, I use this analogy. I kind of came up to me one day. I was talking about foreign policy, and I analogized it to, well, the way you have to understand the North Korea-China relationship is that North Korea is the pit bull, China's the owner, right? And it doesn't have complete control of the dog, but it's got one of those really tough leashes. So when it really wants to jerk it back hard, it can, right? But you never know that the dog could just turn around and bite you on the leg, could just bite a passerby. And the nations around it, imagine them strolling through the park that is East Asia. The nations around it, South Korea, Japan, they're afraid of the dog. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why they kiss up to the owner. Please don't let that dog come eat, right? Yeah. The ruling class is in a way the owner, and the mob is the pit bull. Right. And they haven't jerked the leash, but maybe they're afraid to jerk the leash. Maybe they think if I jerk the leash too hard on this mob, it'll just turn around and kill me, and so I have to let it go. Which, if that's true, would mean they don't really have that. So it's really a separable question, which is, do they have the capacity to control these mobs, and do they have the will or the desire? Right. You got to separate those out. I don't really know the answer to either one, but for one reason or another, all we can just look at the facts, which is so far they haven't done it. Yeah. Whether because they can't or they don't want to. We can speculate for hours.
Yeah, I mean, if you were gonna be a conspiracy theorist and put your finger on the guy that at least is trying to hold the leash, right? I mean, Joe Biden's deteriorating in front of our eyes. Is it George Soros? I mean, who is the person or the group?
Soros seems to be egging it on, and I see no sense from what I read about Soros that he has any desire to rein it in. Yeah. I mean, he's behind these awful prosecutors who are letting everybody go without bail or giving the bail back. I mean, one of the things that I was reading about, somebody sent me an article reading about this today, these big organizations that raise bail money, and then you pay it, and if there's bail reform where you have one of these Soros elected DAs, in a lot of instances, they just give you the bail money, which somebody else, which in effect means you got paid to protest. Right. So you go in there, you get arrested, you're arraigned, you have whatever bail, somebody pays it for you, and then the court officer gives you the money when your bail is waived, and you walk out. I just got $1,000, whatever it is, for rioting and getting arrested. Yeah. Soros seems to have his foot completely on the gas. Another one who does is Bezos. Right. Which is, I find weird, but he owns the Washington Post, right? He doesn't have a controlling interest. He just owns it outright, bought it, took it private, was formerly a public company. And the Washington Post has become a complete out and out blaring propaganda megaphone for woke madness, pro-rioting and anti-police demonstration and everything. So I don't know if Jeff isn't paying attention, but the people running his newspaper, which the richest man in the world owns, have the megaphone. You remember the old "This is Spinal Tap"? They got it to 11. Just mass leftist destabilization, race war, hatred propaganda at 24/7. Yeah. And so he either doesn't know and isn't paying attention. No, he's a busy guy. Maybe he doesn't. Or he thinks this is in his interest. Yeah. Or he's just so ideologically corrupted by this stuff that even if it isn't in his personal interest, he just wants it to happen anyway. And he figures, I'm worth 150 billion. Who cares if I lose a couple bill or even a 50 bill? If the country implodes, I'll still be the richest man in the world. But in the meantime, burn it all down. So Bezos isn't trying to, owning the Washington Post is owning a really large piece of the mainstream media. And if he wanted to rein it in, he could do that. He could just call the people who work for him and tell them to rein it in, or fire them and hire them with other people. And he's not doing that.
Wow. Yeah, that's a bizarre dynamic, and when you quite put it like that, it hadn't occurred to me previously. I mean, it's like Versailles putting out revolutionary broadsides. You know, it's there's something going on
Something
there.
weird about it. They either think it's in their interests,
Mm-hmm.
which could be true. Maybe we haven't figured it out. I think about this all the time. Maybe
Yeah.
it really is in their interests. In what way?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing, this is not a thought original to me, but people have said, look, if anybody's benefiting, like why after 2 or 3 months of rioting nationwide, which by the way still goes on, the media tries to cover it up, but you can find out about it. Why does the stock market keep going up? Right?
Yeah.
That's weird. Odd, right? Well, the reason is because it's a handful of very highly capitalized companies that are floating the entire index. And apparently they're doing better. And one of them, of course, is Amazon, because when every small business in America gets burned to the ground or goes out of business because it's been forced shut for months and can't pay its bills, well, the megacorps take over, right? So in that sense, maybe Bezos, with the destruction of the U.S. economy and of the retail core and cities, is in his interests. I mean, but just yesterday, I think, in Seattle, rioters, looters, bashed in the windows of an Amazon store in Seattle and looted it out. They've looted Amazon trucks. Jeff doesn't seem very concerned about that either. He must think, well, whatever. I got a lot of trucks. Truck. I mean, does he care about the drivers who are his employees? Given the way he treats his employees, from what I read, he probably doesn't.
Yeah.
They're replaceable too.
In the little time that remains to us, I just want to ask you. So I think we've gotten a lot out in this interview about what the left looks like, what they want, and what the different factions want. You talk a little bit in this essay about what we want or what we should want, and you talk a lot about American unity, what it can possibly look like in 2020 and going forward.
Yeah.
And he says it's not going to look like 1985, let alone the post World Wars and consensus. And so what, in your view, what can we agree on?
I think we need a long-term plan to regain a cultural unity that if the country is going to stay together the way it is now, that is to say, with the same basic citizenry and the same basic territory. And I don't conceive that as a given. I'm willing to entertain the possibility that the country may not stay together.
Yeah.
And I discussed that in chapter 7. And the reason I'm willing to entertain it is precisely because all the power centers in the country seem to be to have their foot on the gas so hard. They don't either they want to break the country, they don't realize they're breaking the country or something, but it may break, whether that's advertent or inadvertent. So if it were to stay together long term, we will need to regain a sense of cultural unity that we once had but have lost. But that's out of reach in the foreseeable future. I don't see how you regain cultural unity tomorrow or next year. That's a generational project. Yeah. So the way to regain some semblance of unity in the near term would be economic unity, which is where I think the real promise of Trumpism is, which is to build a kind of middle and working class coalition that addresses income inequality, that addresses the decline of the middle class, that addresses the difficulty or even near impossibility of family formation because of high costs and low wages, making it impossible to buy a home, get married, raise a kid, that addresses all of these issues, manufacturing, trade, that builds a real solidarity, a trans-regional solidarity, a trans-racial solidarity, a trans-ethnic solidarity, and the basis of a new party among the working and middle classes, which means that the insanely rich are not going to keep getting as rich, and they may even get poor. They'll still be rich. But it also means that the kind of rentier, paper pushing, upper middle class clerisy, of which I'm a member, and I had copped to that 12 years as a corporate drone in Manhattan doing that kind of work. I call ourselves, we're the valet class of the bourgeoisie. Those people are not, who have pretty good lives, won't do as well in a new economic arrangement that benefits the true middle and working classes. And I think they're gonna scream and howl and fight like hell because they, as much as they want to make it all about other people's privilege and woke justice issues and stuff, the fact is they're a fairly privileged class, and they don't want to give up their privileges. And in a more Trumpian, and I view more just economic order, they're, to a certain extent, their privilege and their income and their status in society would go down. And so you can expect them to fight that like hell and to lie about what they're really doing. You saw glimmers of this when Obama came in proposing some pretty big tax hikes, and that he wasn't able to do because his double income, supporters, each making $250,000 a year, howled and said, "We're barely middle class and hanging on," and this and this and that. You remember there were a couple of articles I don't know if you remember this, but like one went sort of viral around, I think it was during the transition. So it was after Obama won, but before he took office. So sometime in like late 08, 09, some guy in Chicago wrote about how impossible it was to get by, and he had this pretty darn substantial six-figure income.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, "Oh, poor you." But that class will fight this. And so, but it could, I think, they could and should adjust.
Right.
They're not going to be, tumble all the way back down into poverty.
Yeah.
But, to build some real trans-regional unity in those classes, again, on an economic basis, then to me is the I'm not going to say the only hope, but it's the only hope I've thought of for laying a foundation for then over a generation or two rebuilding a sense of cultural unity.
Well, the book, once again, is called The Stakes: America at the Point of No Return. I, myself, am certainly looking forward to devouring it. You can get it wherever books are sold and pre-ordered, I think, on Amazon.
Yeah, pre-order. September 1 is the publication date.
Great. Yeah, so it's out in September. You can read an excerpt from it in the latest Claremont Review of Books. Michael Anton, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Before we close out this episode, I want to give a special thank you. A remote friend of mine, somebody I know only through Twitter, reached out and offered to compose original music for the Close Read podcast. And I was, of course, delighted to take him up on that. His name is Benjamin Squirett. And you may have noticed that our music selections at the beginning and end of each episode have now changed. That's a permanent feature. We've adopted this as our official Close Read music. So thank you, Benjamin. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Close Read, a Claremont Review of Books podcast and a production of the Claremont Institute. Our publisher is Ryan Williams, our producer is Jake Gannon, and I'm your host, Spencer Clavin. Thanks to Benjamin Squirett for our music. If you liked this episode and you'd like to hear more in-depth interviews based on the Claremont Review of Books, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on all major platforms, and if you'd like to support us, we encourage you to leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you again next time.